welcome to the third annual presentation of the Weston International Award. It is a very prestigious award that rewards nonfiction on the global stage. And tonight we are going to celebrate Leslie Jamison. Let's give her a nice round of applause right here. She's right here. She would appreciate that, I'm sure. To begin, I'll ask you to join us in acknowledging the land on which we gather. Toronto is part of the Dish with One Spoon territory, named for a treaty between the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the Credit Valley. Since its creation, subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans and all newcomers, have been incorporated into that treaty in the spirit of peace and friendship and respect. We extend our gratitude to the past, present, and future elders and teachers who carry the knowledge of this land. To have everyone here, to honor somebody's great work, and jurors here who put in countless hours reviewing the work, and everybody here to celebrate that. So let's please give ourselves a big round of applause for being here and celebrating this in a time of some pretty sticky stuff. So my name is Ali Hassan. As I mentioned, I've also written a memoir. It's not a competition, Leslie. I've also written a memoir. They allow a lot of people to. It's called Is There Bacon in Heaven, my memoir. So it doesn't maybe sound like it from the title, but it is an exploration of my experiences and trying my best to embrace my heritage while pursuing my own goals of stand-up comedy and acting and performing for audiences in Canada and globally. So I have a special place in my heart for nonfiction. Nonfiction, as you would all know and appreciate, has this wonderful ability to take the specific and the personal and make it feel universal. And it's something that invites readers to engage with new ideas and experiences and cultures that aren't their own. And this evening, Writers' Trust of Canada will honor an author who has advanced our understanding of the world and the human condition. Leslie Jamison's impressive body of work places her at the heart of contemporary nonfiction. She's an author worthy of celebration and deserving of a global readership. Her writing is prize recognized, if I can invent a hyphenated word. Award-winning, I believe is the way people say it. She's held many prestigious fellowships. She currently serves on the faculty at the University of Columbia, at Columbia University, and she is in charge of guiding the next generation of nonfiction writers as they embark on their career. So this evening we're going to welcome Leslie up here to the podium for a talk, and that'll be followed by her conversation with author and journalist Marni Jackson. Yeah, no imposter syndrome here. By the way, Leslie, your work, Leslie's written this great piece in the New Yorker about imposter syndrome, and that gave my wife and I hours of conversation this weekend. We were talking about your most recent book and talking about alcoholism, and my wife now thinks I drink too much. That's a separate conversation for another time, but you really, this is like a testament to your work, that even just talking about it with somebody like my wife who's not familiar with it, it gave rise to so much interesting conversation in the house. Before we get started, I want to mention that both the Weston International Award and Hillary Weston Writers' Trust Prize for Nonfiction exist thanks to the generosity and the vision of the Hillary and Galen Weston Foundation. Last week, Writers' Trust announced the 2025 Hillary Weston Trust Prize for Nonfiction. The shortlist includes 5 books that blend the personal and collective stories of resilience and loss and transformation. And we encourage you, and I would say we even urge you, to check out those books, explore them at writerstrust.com. To kick off our night, I'd like to welcome to the stage Writers' Trust Executive Director, David Leonard.
Ali does so much to bring books to the forefront in society, through Canada Reads, through his own memoir, which he's written, if you heard that. And his energy is palpable and necessary in our book world. So I am indeed David Leonard, Executive Director of the Writers' Trust. Thanks for being here. It's great to see so many people. It's great to be in this beautiful space again for the 3rd year. Huge thank you to the Hillary and Galen Weston Foundation for making this award and evening possible. We also have other supporters who make this possible, so I want to thank PwC, the Globe and Mail, CBC Ideas, and Hachette Book Group, and Little Brown and Company. I should also say that this lecture will be broadcast on CBC Ideas down the line later in the fall, so watch out for that. We also have a representative here from the US Consul General, so thank you for being here. And sprinkled throughout this audience, you have various members of the Writers' Trust Board of Directors. This is a very hardworking volunteer group who guides us, makes things possible, and we're extremely grateful to them. Tonight, we're here celebrating nonfiction, about celebrating voices. We're here about celebrating how stories connect us. You know, nonfiction writers, as you all know, they bring us humanity, broadened perspectives, comfort, sometimes challenge. Writers are sense makers. You know, they bring complexity and nuance. They help us to a better understanding of who we are, of what we believe, and maybe even in the best cases, what we might become. And these times, you know, they require that kind of sense-making, the slow, careful thought, research, time, consideration, nuance. And because it takes a long time to write nonfiction, especially good nonfiction like the kind that Leslie writes, it requires a lot of attention, and the economics, let's be honest, aren't always in favor of the writers who write those books. But we need them to write. We need them to help us navigate the world that's too frequently mediated and distorted by social media. They need our support to do so. So by being here tonight, you're saying yes to nuance, you're saying yes to complexity, you're saying yes to books, and you're saying yes to writers. So thank you for that. And as part of saying yes, tonight I'm just here to celebrate you with all of my colleagues at Writers' Trust of Canada who do incredible work behind the scenes to make an event like this possible, and of course with Leslie, the winner of this year's prize. Writers' Trust exists, you know, because our founders, who I will name because I can't not, it's Pierre Burton, David Young, Margaret Lawrence, Graham Gibson, and Margaret Atwood. That very august group understood that society is built with financial gaps that some writers might fall through. And our job, ideally, is to lessen the impact of those gaps. So we have career development programs. We have a quick turnaround emergency grant for writers in immediate need. We have paid opportunities for writers on juries, mentorships, things like that. And our support and the literal millions of dollars we've been able to give directly to authors comes primarily from philanthropy, from people like you. And you know, I see, looking around this beautiful room, many of our supporters are here tonight. So thank you for being here. You know, by supporting Writers' Trust, you're supporting financial sustainability for writers, sure, but by extension, you're really supporting a strong, independent Canadian culture, and that really matters. We also exist to celebrate, oh, thank you for that. Yeah. We exist to celebrate and reward great writers in writing. So, you know, you've seen some of the prizes on the screens here. It's 11 literary prizes, including tonight's. This prize was born out of the idea that nonfiction writers operate in a global environment. And, you know, it's important to find ways to connect Canadian nonfiction and international nonfiction together. Global issues and local issues are interconnected, and so too should be the knowledge that we apply to confronting them. The idea was brought to us by the Honourable Hilary Weston. This prize and the Canadian Companion Prize, which we just saw, the Hilary Weston Writers' Trust Prize for Nonfiction. It's celebrating its 15th anniversary this year, and these two prizes are named in her honor. As you all know, we recently lost Mrs. Weston, a tremendous loss to the country, a tremendous loss to the world, a great partner to our communities. You know, she gave so much to so many, not just in the literary world, but in many, many different sectors, and it really is a tremendous impact. So we are here in her memory tonight, but also we're carrying on her legacy by celebrating great nonfiction. So we thought we should go to our community who benefited from her generosity, and we asked some writers to speak to her impact, and so there's a short video to follow.
It's always a privilege to celebrate the work of Canada's finest writers of real stories through this prize, and to help these exemplary works of nonfiction find readers in Canada and beyond.
Over the past 15 years, Mrs. Weston supported Canadian writers both here and abroad, and it has been an incredibly impactful legacy.
It's hard to think of anyone who has done more to support nonfiction in Canada and internationally than Mrs. Weston. The establishment of the Hilary Weston Writers' Trust Prize for Nonfiction was a game changer for the genre in Canada.
The winner of the prize will receive Canada's largest literary award for nonfiction.
Well, I think before I became involved, there was an impression that non-fiction was the sort of poor sister of fiction. It's no longer the biography. They're wonderful stories within themselves.
Non-fiction can be as supple as water and as sharp as obsidian. Non-fiction possesses plot, character, dialogue, tempo, suspense, just as the novel does. It can span the vastness of geological deep time.
She believed that nonfiction literature is a catalyst for progress that gives us the tools to solve the problems of today and shape a more resilient tomorrow.
Some of these works of non-fiction hold a mirror up to our lives and ask hard questions. Some drill deeply into our political landscape, and others take us on journeys to faraway lands.
It is an extraordinary honor, this. And there's a generosity to this prize. It's a holistic vision.
Thank you, Hilary Weston, for your generosity.
I've come to know the invaluable work the Weston family does for the literary community in this country.
And of course, the Hilary and Galen Weston Foundation as a whole, above all.
I want to thank all those who donate and give in so many ways to enable the work that the Writers' Trust does.
Her legacy lives on in the books that she rewarded, the voices that she championed, and the readers inspired to learn more about our world.
Though each book is different, all of the authors share exceptional literary talent and have enriched our lives through their research and their discovery.
Well, that was very touching. Thank you. Lovely, absolutely lovely. So thank you, David. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for celebrating my mother's commitment to Canadian writers and to their work. I'd also like to thank Dan, Kamal, Jenny, and Chase for their comments in such a thoughtful and lovely video. For those of you who knew my mother, books played an enormous part in her life. Like many in this room too, she was a lifelong reader, and she had a particular passion for nonfiction. She was constantly seeking out the latest big history book or biography, and yes, she would happily admit the occasional memoir featuring some salacious gossip or something that she wanted to learn more about, maybe talk about at a dinner party. But she wasn't just an avid reader. She authored 3 nonfiction books herself, including a bestseller on gardens and on gardening. And our family looks very much forward to celebrating that other great passion of hers, which was gardens and gardening, as we embark on the revitalization of Queen's Park, just down the street, in partnership with the City of Toronto. And so no matter what the topic, the love of books ran throughout her life. It made my mother an immediate admirer of the Writers' Trust and the decades of work that they've embodied to enrich the world of Canadian letters, to support authors in need, and to publicly celebrate the craft of writing. For the last 15 years, the Trust gave the honor of naming its largest prize for nonfiction writing by a Canadian to my mother. It was something she took enormous pride in, sending the winning books to friends and to family far and wide, meeting with the authors whenever she could, and learning about their creative process and their ideas. In recent years, she became convinced that in a world undergoing rapid and at times dislocating change, it was essential to connect with Canadian writers and readers with their international authors, so that together we can think globally about the challenges that we face. And this is what led to the creation of the prize that we are awarding this evening, the Weston International Award. Congratulations, Leslie. Thank you for joining us at lunch on Sunday. We had a wonderful time chatting together. It turns out that we went to the same university, and then I was a student at Columbia. Leslie is a teacher at Columbia, but we never crossed paths. Turns out I'm a bit older than I'd like to believe I am. So congratulations on being the third winner of this prize, recognizing your acclaimed body of nonfiction writing. The raw and vivid lens through which your work explores complex topics, touches us all, and is deeply, deeply captivating. I look forward very much to your conversation with Marni. I'm also pleased to announce that the Hilary and Galen Weston Foundation has renewed its support for these two prizes that were beloved by my mother for another 3 years. That was kind of nice that I was allowed to come here and say that. That was nice for me. Thank you for the recognition. I know Mum would have enjoyed tremendously being here tonight in the company of Leslie, the jury, and of course this fantastic audience who cares so deeply about ideas, about books, and the transformative power of nonfiction. It helps us all make sense of the world a little bit better together. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, David Leonard, and thank you, Galen Weston, for your family's dedication and devotion to literature. I did want to talk about how we get to this evening and how we get to our esteemed winner. The Weston International Award is adjudicated with 2 tiers of assessment. First is with an international advisory committee, and that committee consisted of Mariella Frostrup, Pico Iyer, and Sam Tannenhouse. Let's give them a nice round of applause. There they are. And then it is adjudicated by our esteemed jury of Canadian nonfiction writers, Carmen Aguirre, Jeet Heer, Marni Jackson, Benjamin Perrin, and Michelle Porter. The Writers' Trust extends its gratitude to both the committee and the jurors for their great work. Let's give them a nice round of applause. And while you're in the mood for applauding, to speak on behalf of the jury, the great Carmen Aguirre. Please welcome her to the stage.
Thank you, Ali. On behalf of my fellow jurors, Jeet, Marni, Benjamin, and Michelle, I would like to heartily congratulate Leslie Jamison on the honor of winning the 3rd annual Weston International Award. Our jury received a pool of candidates from the members of the International Advisory Committee that Ali mentioned, Mariella, Pico, and Sam, and we read 1 book by each author to narrow our field to a short list of 5 incredible talents whose works we explored further. To us, Leslie's writing was captivating. Her use of opposites, her ongoing motif of dichotomies, and her palette of dark and light allow her to move gracefully from macro to micro. She expertly weaves the well-trod journey of an artist with a level of self-exposure that is rare and vulnerable. In our jury citation, we wrote, Leslie Jamison brings her mastery of language to subjects that often lack words. Addiction, motherhood, divorce, the writing life. Through evocative, compelling, and immersive storytelling, leavened by self-deprecating humor and tenderness, the author transports us into her world with all its longings and awakenings. She has the rare gift of being able to fuse her most intimate thoughts with insights gleaned from rigorous scholarship in the social sciences and history. If nonfiction at its best pursues both truth and beauty, This author demonstrates that the art of the writing out of our lives is at the highest level. Jamison expands our experience of what can be shared on the page and consoles us with her powerfully articulated honesty. It is my honor to welcome Leslie to the stage.
Thank you so much, Carmen, and thank you to all the jurors at both stages. Just an incredible honor to be read with such care, such insight, such close attention. Thank you all in this room for being here tonight, as Ali was saying, to kind of honor how incredible books are and what they bring to our lives. Thank you to the Writers' Trust, to David and Amanda, and everyone there for bringing this together so beautifully and making it all possible. And thank you most of all to the Weston family. Galen, it was such a pleasure to meet you and talk to you yesterday. And I'm so sorry I couldn't meet your mother. I was so glad to see her in this video and to get even just some sense of what an extraordinary person she was and the impact that she and your family have had. It is, as David was saying, to write, it's hard in all the ways that have to do with craft and self-interrogation if you do this kind of work. But it's also it's hard to have the space and the time to go to those deep places and support like this, not just this award, which I feel so grateful for, but just the scale at which you support all kinds of writers is, it's essential to giving the world this thing that we need, that deepens and enlarges our experience of being alive. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Marni, I can't wait to talk. I'm just going to share a few words on what I do or what I try to do and how I do it, and then we'll get to chat. So I started writing about my own life somewhat incidentally and not very successfully. I was studying at the Iowa Writers' Workshop, which involved, honestly, a lot of time spent drinking in the same bars my favorite writers had gotten drunk in. And I decided to try nonfiction, largely because my fiction had grown too beholden to workshop truisms and the suffocating desire to please others. Writing only felt good to me when it felt like throwing myself off a cliff. So I decided to throw myself off a different cliff, the truth. The first few times I wrote personal essays, I wrote almost exclusively about the parts of myself I liked least, or the situations I most regretted. I was convinced that self-deprecation was the only way to speak truthfully about myself, or at least the only way to escape the thing I feared most, the trap of self-aggrandizement. As it turned out, this approach didn't play out particularly well in workshop. Is there such a thing as too much honesty? One guy asked. He said he found it nearly impossible to like the author of my essay. Then he corrected himself quickly. Impossible to like the narrator. We were forever correcting ourselves in that class, a class devoted to nonfiction, forever saying some version of this. I mean, the narrator. But we could all feel that the stakes were different, more terrifying and intimate when it was our own lives we brought to the page. Over the years, I've come to believe that honesty involves something more than relentless self-deprecation. Writing artful personal narrative involves writing away from two opposite poles: total identification with the past self and total disavowal of the past self. Both, I think, are attempts to preempt the reader's judgment, to say, I can defend myself before you accuse me, or else I can accuse myself before you accuse me. Rigorous personal narrative demands refusing the refuge of either extreme, I'm the best, I'm the worst, and living instead the mess and contradictions of selfhood and experience, making the self neither villain nor saint, and granting the same dignity of complexity to everyone else as well. I've come to believe that the forms of rigor and tenderness that nuanced personal narrative demands, self-scrutiny and thirst for insight, a willingness to be the butt of the joke, to be wrong, to be surprised, are tendencies we can bring back to daily living, to move through the world with humility, grace, humor, and compassion, to tolerate complexity, to stay curious. All that said, the fact that I make art from my own life can still sometimes feel embarrassing, even after years of writing and teaching personal narrative, as if I've failed to get over myself or failed to learn how to make anything else. It wasn't supposed to be like this, a feeble voice inside me protests. I started out as a novelist. My shame, I think, doesn't simply stem from the fear that there might be an unredeemable solipsism baked into personal writing, but from the fear that my particular life is too unremarkable to bear the weight of narrative. This is the eternal question that my students bring to me each week in office hours. Why would anyone possibly care? For literary fiction, we don't question the value of the unextraordinary life as a worthy subject. Mrs. Dalloway is about a woman throwing a dinner party. Ulysses is about a cuckolded salesman wandering through Dublin. But in, this will go down with me to my grave, my paraphrase of James Joyce. But in nonfiction, there's a sense that you need either extraordinary accomplishment or extraordinary trauma to make your story worthwhile. My flashes of shame also stem, I think, from the presumption of artlessness that can attach to personal narrative. The assumption that when you make art from life, you just sort of excrete it. A male, spoiler alert, I don't quite think that way. A male critic once described Chris Kraus's book, I Love Dick, a book that is playfully and provocatively autobiographical, as a text, quote, not so much written as secreted. The verb secreted is quite telling, I think. It suggests maximum exposure and minimal effort. It's also emblematic of the bodily language often applied to writing about the self, especially female writing about the self. Gushing, vomiting, purging, bleeding. Identity and experience become fluids that get barfed or sweated onto the page. Leave it to a woman to reveal herself as little more than a body when she'd imagined herself a writer. These bodily metaphors, secreting, bleeding, vomiting, point to an important misunderstanding about how so-called confessional writing works, or personal narrative more broadly. It's often seen as straight exposure, selfhood offered without craft and artifice. But I believe the word exposure is already a lie. What we do on the page or off of it, it's always something else. It's self-construction. Or rather, the exposure involved in personal narrative is less like the exposure of disrobing, getting naked on the page, and more like the exposure that happens in a dark room, a process in which you bring lived experience into contact with sensibility, curiosity, and the possibilities of language, like prints exposed to their chemical baths, and try to express what this alchemy brings into view. One of our most dismissive terms for art made from life is navel gazing, a phrase that I heard dismissively applied to my own work for years before I learned that it actually derives from an ancient Greek meditation practice called, this is the hardest part of my talk, omphalos, literally navel thinking. Omphalos is navel and skepsis means contemplation. These days, navel gazing is understood as the epitome of solipsism. But in ancient Greek culture, the navel was seen as a site of connection to the divine. The marble omphalos at Delphi, for example, was one of the most important sites of communion with the gods. Biologically, the navel is the part of the self that marks its earliest threshold of connection. a physical reminder that we are not self-made, but always produced by forces beyond ourselves. The Greeks understood the navel in this way, the mark of our connection to something larger than ourselves, and to me, this is what rigorous personal narrative also involves, a consideration of self whose motivating questions and deepening insights resonate beyond the self, not through false conflation or universalizing insistence, but through a close, faithful, dynamic commitment to particularity, the infinitude of any given life as a site of reckoning and truth. In Christian theology, there's an idea called the scandal of particularity, the improbable but essential fact that God became incarnate as a particular man with dirt under his fingernails and spit in his mouth. The scandal is not only the absurdity of divinity dwelling inside a flawed mortal vessel. This man is God, this guy with shifty eyes and stringy hair washing the feet of his disciples, but the absurdity of putting so much weight on a specific man and his specific life. The writer Annie Dillard brings the scandal of divine particularity back to all of us. She writes, "The scandal of particularity is the only world that I, in particular, know. We're all up to our necks in this particular scandal." Yes, we're all up to our necks in it. We all live inside the particulars of our own lives, stifling and beloved, profound and mundane, vexing and glorious, because we have no choice. We can't live other lives. It can feel absurd to believe in ordinary life as a site of profundity, school pickups, grocery store runs, whispered fights in bed. But this is the scandalous truth of all personal writing, the scandal of big truths dwelling in ordinary lives. But of course big truths dwell in ordinary lives. What other vessels could they possibly have? What process could be more ancient or essential than telling stories about what we've lived? Over the past 20 years, I've written about my own life from many angles. In a critical memoir called The Recovering that tells the story of my own drinking and sobriety alongside the stories of other writers and artists who have tried to get sober. In a memoir called Splinters that recounts the birth of my daughter and the end of my marriage. And in essays that often braid together personal narrative with other modes of inquiry, reportage, criticism, cultural history, essays about everything from cesarean sections to anorexia, imposter syndrome to ultramarathons, past life memories to gaslighting, perfectionism to the Las Vegas Strip, Frida Kahlo's painted corsets to a mysterious blue whale known as the loneliest whale in the world. My work is a range. I do reported work that rarely uses the I at all. I write fiction about people I've imagined entirely, and I write personal essays that delve into some of the toughest, most complex emotional experiences of my own life. Relationships and their endings, childbirth, abortion, heart surgery, eating disorders, sexuality and desire. But my life is just one well of source material I draw on. It does not have a monopoly on my interest, but I don't shy away from it either. It's the life I know best. All my work, across all these modes and genres, is animated by the same fundamental curiosity about what it feels like to be alive and how we can express that experience of aliveness with language. Of all the forms of writing I do, there's no writing I end up revising more than personal narrative. When the writing is about my own life, I'll end up revising 5 times, 10, 15 times, over the course of years, almost always, years of living and thinking and reconsidering. I'm not just talking about line edits, but major rethinking and reworking, telling parts of the story I was too ashamed or afraid to tell the first time around, recognizing that I did something for many reasons rather than just one, granting more grace to people I still resent. And it's this commitment to revision, more than anything else, that I try to carry back to my life off the page. This willingness to revise myself and the stories I've told myself about my own life. Those well-trodden tales, sometimes self-serving, sometimes self-punishing, about who I am. The first draft of my book, The Recovering, an exploration of addiction, recovery, and creativity, began with something like a cinematic montage of the ways I'd fallen in love with drinking. Getting drunk in Midwestern backyards full of fireflies, air smoky from bratwurst on the grill, cold beers drunk on the side of covered bridges. An early reader of these opening pages told me, I don't want to see you living your best life getting buzzed. I want to see you with your wine-stained teeth, too nervous to speak. That reader was right. I was trapped inside the same evasions I was trying to document, using intoxication as an escape from vulnerability. I was doing it on the page just like I'd done it in real life. I was showing the dream before I showed the broken, self-loathing, lurching around with insecurity self who needed something from that dream. Without that desperation, the dream itself was insufferable, like a self-congratulatory yearbook entry. So I forced myself into scene, specifically into one of my most embarrassing nights, a night that dramatized how much I craved some sense of affirmation and acceptance. The night I did cocaine for the first time with a guy who was barely, but just barely interested in me. Back then, my favorite kind. I was wearing these bright white pants I was really proud of. They had a huge silver belt that was actually attached to the pants. You could not take it off, and why would you want to? I was wearing a winter jacket inside and still shivering because this guy I was doing coke with was too broke to pay for much heat, and it was an Iowa winter and really cold, like kill you cold, and he was cutting lines with a credit card that was almost certainly actually a debit card, and I needed so desperately for this night to be the beginning of some great romance between us. So I lingered in this guy's living room for hours, practically begging him to kiss me, and then he finally said it. Are you waiting for me to kiss you? And I sort of nodded, yes, stunned at this subtext becoming so pathetically explicit, and he finally did. But he seemed half-hearted, like he was only doing it because I begged him to. And then I stumbled home humiliated. This was the part of me that needed to drink. That girl stumbling home, bruising her shins on the stairs, already imagining this guy telling his friends at a bar the next night, like it was weird, she just really seemed like she wanted me to kiss her. This girl hating herself for asking someone to want her. This was the part of me that needed to drink and needed to be written. Not that self standing in a backyard strung with twinkly lights, surrounded by fireflies, laughing. I didn't know that laughing girl. I'd watched her from across the yard, maybe. She was the self I wanted the world to see, but I needed to write away from that self. I wasn't writing a social resume, I was writing a book about need. Pivoting from backyard fireflies to debit card cut coke was an exercise in crossing out the dream and exposing vulnerability as the soft underbelly of swagger, showing the need before I showed the accessories and props the need gathered around itself, booze and male desire, these futile attempts to satisfy its bottomless appetites. Pivoting from backyard fireflies to debit card cut coke was also a useful exercise in moving away from what I think of as performative confession, something akin to a humble brag, and confession that is actually crawling around in the weeds. As the essayist Philip Lopate likes to say, the problem with most confessional writing is that it does not confess enough. I like this formulation not only because it doubles down on something, confession, that many writers of personal narrative like to disavow, but also because it aptly diagnoses a crucial problem with a certain kind of I. When the I has been deployed as a character, but not yet as a narrator, the one who lived the experience, but not yet the one who can make meaning from it. Which is to say, often personal narrative tells you what happened without doing enough work to figure out why it matters, without using the I as a character to fuel a deeper investigation. So what does it mean to confess enough? For me, it has to do with following shame to insight, rather than getting stuck in either self-justification or self-laceration. Often the first story we tell ourselves about why we did something isn't the truest version of our motivations. And our job, through revision and self-suspicion, is to get to the messier account lurking beyond the edges of what I call the cocktail party version of the story. I sometimes envision this part of the process as looking for a trapdoor in the floor to get to the rooms of truth beneath. Finding the I beneath the floorboards is often a question of revision. Bearing down hard on language that wants to generalize, moralize, valorize, villainize, or otherwise evade the contradictory resonances of experience. What does it mean to confess enough? It's the difference between saying, oh, I used to get so drunk, but actually feeling proud of those reckless days, and saying, I stood in a guy's doorway and literally begged him to kiss me, which, okay, now we're finally getting somewhere. When I found the I beneath the floorboards, who woke up with bruises on her legs and white powder caked under her nostrils, I found the origins of a dependence, which wasn't about the cocaine so much as the begging itself, the desire to hurl myself at the world and have it give me back to myself with some edges. When my editor, Ben, read the first draft of The Recovering, he told me that the volatile romantic relationship at the core of the story was still blurry. In trying to establish what was breaking down between us, he said, I needed to dramatize our fights more specifically, not just repetitively reiterate that fights were happening. He said it more generously than this. At first, I summoned all my furious defenses. I don't just say we kept fighting, and then I look back at the manuscript. All winter, we kept fighting. I tended to summon our fights in broad brushstrokes of emotional analysis like this. Without booze, I had become needy and vigilant, resenting his long nights out and watching everything he did for signs that he was tired of me because I was so tired of myself. Ben told me I needed to stop saying how I felt. He'd counted 300 usages of the phrase I felt in my manuscript, and do more dramatizing instead, bringing readers more fully into the weeds of conflict. He was urging me deeper into the scandal of particularity. I wasn't up to my neck in it yet. He liked the scene where I described myself as a wild animal, watching my boyfriend flirt with another girl across the room, a scene I had barely been able to write. I wanted so much to part ways from that wild animal, to be someone who had never been her. I was mortified by the prospect of writing more specifically about our fights. They'd been knocked down, drag-out fights about the pettiest things. Who would care? I wanted to skip past the embarrassing narrative and get straight to the insights, to engage in meaning-making as a way to redeem experiences I still felt ashamed of, a way of apologizing for how jealous and insecure I'd been, exonerating that prior self by saying something wise about what she'd done. I wanted to fast forward straight past vulnerability, right into wisdom. But I realized that without the vulnerability, the mess and grit of what happened, the wisdom would just feel like a hollow performance. And of course, without the insight, the storytelling would feel like confession that had not yet confessed enough. I needed to stay in the room with the wild animal, I never dreamed I would get to say this in a room with a bear and a dinosaur, and there's so many wild animals in here, to listen to what she was trying to tell me. I started to realize that the scenes I was most ashamed to narrate were also the ones that illuminated my needs and desires most forcefully. I had to arrive at insight through particularity, rather than using insight to make a kind of end run around the guts of the story, using abstraction as a kind of psychic armor. What did the wild animal teach me? What did my shame, not just the shame of fighting, but the shame of writing about it, teach me? Not just that sobriety exposed my underlying insecurities rather than solving them, but that I felt profoundly degraded by these insecurities, by the helpless checking of text messages, by the banality of an argument about what did or did not constitute flirting, and that I was afraid that the presence of the profane, my own need and fear, would pollute love. That I still thought of love as something other than a force already inescapably, but also gloriously polluted. It was the resistance to specificity, to bringing the full range of the I into the frame that taught me this. That my obsession with a certain kind of purity was the very thing that made it impossible to feel safe. I have never made art from my own life because I believed my life was anything special. It's just the life I have, the one I have lived. When I spend hours interviewing other people for my reported work, it comes from the same well of curiosity, this same animating question: what does it feel like to be alive? All of us have different answers, and our answers are always changing, which means there is so much to stay curious about. Every spring, I teach a graduate writing course at Columbia called The Self. Every spring, it reminds me that personal narrative is, at its core, an act of engagement and community rather than an expression of narcissism. Picture it, picture us. Tuesday afternoons, all 55 of us crammed into a too small classroom with rattling heaters or broken air conditioning, sweating up a storm. The first semester I taught that course, the students started calling themselves the Self Squad. I can still remember them, a man writing about his compulsive relationship to smiling and how it connected to his absent father, his need to please, and his childhood spent in the back of his mom's Thai restaurant in a Los Angeles strip mall. A woman from New Jersey writing about the suburbs, surveillance, single motherhood, and sex. Whenever I looked at her, I remembered a line from one of her essays about feeling like she had grown up in the minivans of tired women. A poet from Nepal who wrote about caregiving, daydreaming, and how the women in her family related to their hair. A woman writing a speculative biography of an ancient Sumerian poet priestess named Enheduanna, wife of the moon god, citizen of Ur, and probably the very first author in history to write in the first person, interrupting a praise lyric to declare herself, "I am Enheduanna," making her entry into the text by announcing her exile, presence earned by absence. "He expelled me from the temple," she wrote. "He made me fly out the window like a swallow." Enheduanna was part of the Self Squad, too. Every day, my students taught me, they still teach me, about the possibilities of personal narrative. If I felt hounded by the shame of solipsism when I first began to write about my own life, I have come to believe something close to the opposite. It is a deeply communal act to make art from your own scandalously particular life and to believe in the art that other people can make from theirs. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. It's so interesting that you would use the words "who would care" as you were writing, something that probably every memoirist thinks about, every writer thinks about, and yet how can you not care when somebody is so open and vulnerable and insightful and has such an incredible command of the language? Thank you so much for that. It was about 25 minutes ago. You said, I can't wait to talk to you, Marni. The time is now. I'm going to call our moderator up. I'm also going to move this podium back if anybody's panicking that they won't be able to see this chat. I'm going to do that for you and hopefully not fall off the stage in the process. Your moderator this evening is herself an author of many acclaimed work of nonfiction. She's also written a novel and plays and documentaries. If you have been keenly watching the screen throughout the evening, you saw her name on the list of 5 jurors who helped to get Leslie Jamison here this evening. Please welcome everybody, Marni Jackson to the stage with Leslie Jamison again.
Well, I'm never going to see my debit card in quite the same way.
There's a lot of things you can use it for, Marni. It's true.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That was so generous, but I'm not surprised because your writing is so generous.
Well, it's
and analytical, generosity, analysis, generosity, analysis. It's wonderful.
Well, thank you, Marni. And I meant it. This is the fun part for me.
fun
I've given my talk, and now I get to talk to you.
Now we get to relax. Now, I know there are quite a few writers out there tonight, and thank you all for coming, writers. But I'm pretty sure some of them wake up at, pardon me, I think they might wake up at 4 a.m. in the morning and think, who cares what I'm writing? What does a mere book do? You know, it's so easy to feel helpless as a writer these days because the world is in tatters. So I just wanted to ask, how do you keep believing in the value of your work?
It's such a great place to begin, Marni, and I think I can never bolster my faith in my writing by looking at my writing. I always have to come back to my life as a reader to feel a sense of belief and commitment in what I could possibly do as a writer. So as a reader, I just feel so not only grateful for, but like truly saved by books and feel so glad they're in the world. Right. And so it's that sense of, you know, not just this book helped me understand something, this book helped me understand what life might be like for somebody in a completely different country or completely different time or completely different place, but also just this book gave me the experience of being utterly transported, like curled in the corner of the couch with just like a little stack of graham crackers. You know, that feeling of immersion and kind of magic. And I just believe in that. I believe in what books have given me. And it's like that kind of kernel of faith and experience that, you know, more than believing, okay, a book's not gonna, you know, get Trump out of office, but it maybe is gonna give somebody some version of what I felt. So we fight the fight on all the fronts, but then I believe we keep doing the thing that makes the world kind of bigger and deeper.
Well, I think you're an optimist, and you're very skeptical about skepticism, which is the default tone of journalism. And I know you did your PhD at Yale on sincerity and addiction in 20th century American literature. So can you tell us what you consider sincerity in a writer?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. I think, I started to feel, and I can tell you when I started to feel it, it was when I was reading Joan Didion's canonical essay, The White Album, which she basically starts with this idea of we tell ourselves stories in order to live and pushes back on it, like that we tell ourselves these neat, sentimental narratives of experience so that we can survive in this kind of irredeemably broken world. But she's quite skeptical about that idea. I mean, for her, that kind of storytelling, there's a kind of falsehood in it. And I remember feeling, and then she basically ends the essay by reiterating a similar version of the same idea. And I remember thinking, have you gotten anywhere? You know, it feels like you're ending in the same place that you began, which is this kind of eternal note of skepticism. And that made me start thinking there's something easier or safer sometimes. Sometimes there's something very necessary about skepticism, especially right now. But there can be something easier about doubting and harder to stand behind something, to say it and mean it. And so when I think about sincerity and writing and the production of literature, part of what I think about is like being willing to do your very best to express a feeling, an experience, a relationship, a place, and not second guess it, not undermine it, not wink about it, not, just to say it in the truest way you can.
I think there's one line you use, you talk about the ethical failure that's buried in skepticism. Yes?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes if skepticism isn't moving from skepticism to try to develop even provisionally an alternative, I think that there's a kind of a retreat or a withdrawal or a kind of implicit alibi in it.
Right. Now, I know you have a tattoo on your arm.
Indeed.
And the quote is, "Nothing human is alien to me." Now, I'm guessing that's before the current administration. Right.
Wait, touche. Yeah, I did get this tattoo well before Trump, but not before Hitler. I mean, there have been plenty of people that I don't really resonate with throughout history. But I think I got this quote, which comes from an ancient Roman play called The Self-Tormentors by a playwright named Terence of Rome. And I was drawn to this less in the sense of it as like a statement of absolute truth, like I can understand everything that everybody's lived, or I share every feeling or every experience, but as a kind of asymptote, like a question to ask almost, like what is, in any given experience, what can I kind of imagine my way towards, or like what's there that I can try to kind of understand better or listen to harder. And as I have lived with this quote on my body for years, I've not only come to be interested in it as a kind of eternal embodied litmus test, like everybody has a feeling about this quote. They have a feeling about, well, what about so-and-so? What about Pol Pot? What about, my mom? What about, there's all these, a kind of desire to prove it wrong in some way, which is itself an interesting reaction. But I've also learned, it was Karl Marx's favorite quote. It was one of Montaigne's favorite quotes. Like, it has this kind of journey through history that's also interesting to me, like the people who have found something in it. And a friend of mine told me that in the original play, which I should confess I haven't read, it's actually uttered a bit ironically, like it's a gossip who says it, and so he's basically saying this is why I gossip. Yeah, right. When he's saying like this is why I gossip, like nothing is alien to me. But that actually felt like very on brand to me. That I was taking in deadly earnest the thing that somebody else had offered as a kind of parenthetical aside. You were talking about the first person, and the first person has quite a long history, really. It's gone through many stages. Now, when I was a journalist starting out 4 or 5 decades ago, personal writing was dismissively referred to as soft news, right? And there was no Substack, and if you wrote a column about motherhood, it would be in the lifestyle section, right below the bridge column, And then it enjoyed a moment in the 1990s when the personal was political. And at that point, it became more authentic to write out of your life. But look at us now. We're awash in the first person, in tell-all TikToks and auto-fiction and celebrity memoirs. You've made a really persuasive case for the personal narrative. But I want to know how you go on believing that the first person has value. Yeah, I mean, I think...
How does it cut through the noise? How can your first person still cut through all the noise?
Yeah, I mean, I think your point about the long history of the first person is really important here. Like, I think, there can be a temptation to think about things in terms of literary trends or marketplace trends, or, okay, memoirs were really big in the aughts, but they don't sell as well now. And, there was a personal essay boom on the internet between 2014 and 2018. All these things might be true, but I don't really care. Like, what matters to me is that there is something that feels kind of primal about, that's why I like to end on Nhitwana, you know, that there's something primal about the impulse to speak what we've lived. And so to me, that doesn't feel like a fad. It's not made, it's not kind of contaminated or undermined by the ways that there might be other acts of self-expression, you know, TikTok or the offhanded tweet or some, you know, not all acts of self-exposure are art, but I don't think that it follows from that that there is no art that doesn't involve self-exposure, right? So to me, it all comes down to the same things that would make a piece of literary fiction craft as well. Okay, is language being used in sort of rigorous and original ways? Are you paying attention to consciousness as something complex rather than falling into easy cliches or truisms? And whether the source material is what you've lived or another person's life in a piece of journalism or an imagined life in a work of fiction, like it's that commitment to complexity and to kind of using language to get to difficult and seemingly inexpressible places that makes it art. So I believe in not all first person, but I believe in that first person.
Well, I think I've taught a lot of memoir in my life too, and it's always interesting that when people bring a personal story to the workshop, they go, it's in the third person, but it's their story.
Yeah.
And then we start to work on them. We say, well, have you tried the first person? Oh no, I couldn't. That would be too selfish. That would be too indulgent. You know, like little old me, I'm not going to. But then you teach them that with enough craft, with the right language, the right details, the first person becomes a character. And that's the great alchemy that you go through writing a memoir that ends up to be a crafted thing and not just personal catharsis. And every single year people go through this. Don't you find that with your students?
Absolutely. No, I think I think that way of framing it is just right, that there's a process of alchemy and translation and transition. We were actually talking about this at lunch yesterday, that I think that's part of why it's so important to me to talk about revision as not just a part of my process always, but a particularly acute and extended part of the process when it comes to first person, that it's not just that I say what happened, it's that, you know, I have to really figure out what matters to me about what happened and all the layers of what happened, and have to work to, you know, build. For a reader who's never met me and doesn't know anything about me, there is no sense of me that they have to draw on. The only relationship they have to me as a character is what I've built for them on the page.
Right.
So you have to build it from
Right.
scratch.
It's
like
architecture. It's
yeah.
architecture.
Yeah.
Now, the adjectives that reviewers use for you all the time is unflinching and unsparing and unstinting. You know? A lot of unwords. Because you go so deeply into these messy, visceral stories. And you map your experience of addiction in such incredibly raw detail. And, well, basically you're the queen of the unforgettable detail.
Yeah.
And there's one that stuck in my mind. You were in the empathy exams, your collection of essays. You talk about being on a trip, and you felt that there was something under your skin, in your ankle. There was like an insect under your skin. And of course the doctors thought you were crazy and didn't listen to you. But then lo and behold, you went to the ER and a Bolivian larva crawled out of your ankle, and you described it as a tiny white snorkel. I'm never going to forget that detail.
You're welcome, Marni. I'm glad to have given that to you forever. Dessert will be afterwards. Yeah.
You're the snorkel girl. Right. Now, your memoir, Splinters, is about the end of a marriage and the beginning of motherhood. Another kind of love story. Well, we know now that there's shelves of books about motherhood. One of them's written by me. But I accept that this is a bottomless subject for each new generation because it is such a revolution of the self and a storming of our sense of identity.
Yeah.
So can you talk about the tension between writing and motherhood a little bit?
A storming of our sense of identity is such a perfect way to describe it. The tiniest little invader storming the gates. I mean, I think first of all, one thing I love about that framing of that question is that it gets at another tension, which is the tension between writing an experience that has already been written many times and finding something to say about it that hasn't been said, kind of writing into unoriginal terrain and believing, and sometimes it's hard to believe, right, that there's something in there, that you can speak or you can say. And I think in a way, my life in recovery totally flipped the way that I relate to ideas of originality, or originality as a kind of precondition for literary value or any kind of value. And I think the whole premise of fellowship-based recovery is that none of our stories are original, but that's not a liability, it's an asset. There's something really saving about that. And so I think when I was a mother, became a mother, and started to write about motherhood, at first just in these little scraps, on little napkins and, whatever I could find in these moments where I had time to say something, I think it was helpful to me that I had already in some ways learned to resist the idea that an experience had to be original or just mine, or the fantasy or delusion that it would ever be the case that an experience was just mine, that there was something to say about it anyway. So I think I kind of went into motherhood being like, this is possibly one of the least original experiences ever. I mean, people have been being mothers since the beginning. Everybody has a mother. But also, there's still something profound in it. And I think for me, the content of the experience of motherhood, there was a tension between motherhood and writing in certain ways. Yeah, it takes up your time, it takes your attention. As content, it's, unstintingly repetitive, and some of it is pretty tedious. But on another level, a deeper level, there was so much about the experience of parenting that felt aligned with what I'd always wanted to write about. Like, what does intimacy feel like? What does love feel like? What does it feel like to take care of another human being and feel 1,000 different ways toward them at once, which is often how I felt towards my daughter. And what is it like to watch another consciousness kind of crystallize into visibility right in front of you over a period of many years? Like, these are questions that felt so profoundly connected to what had always interested me about writing.
Is parenthood the ultimate empathy exam?
Yeah, and not always one that I've passed. I think that's another thing that's powerful to me about parenting is like, I've sometimes in my life had an impulse to run away from my own failures, right? If I messed something up, okay, I'll see when I see you or something like that. But that I think with parenting, it's different. In parenting, you can feel like I was just the worst version of myself. I lost it, or I got angry, or I was impatient, or, and then what do? You show up the next moment, you show up the next hour, you show up the next day. And so, it's an exam you're perpetually taking, and no matter what your score was, you take it again,
I think you said that your aspirational parenting self kept colliding with your actual parenting self.
Yeah, yes, still true. And I think, that's actually part of why I believe in, as you said, tales of motherhood or parenting as a bottomless subject, because it's like, well, where does the aspirational self come from? Mm-hmm. The aspirational self comes from consuming too many narratives, or exclusively narratives, where there's some sort of idealized version of a self or a parent, mother, that's impossible to live up to. So to me, if there's like a polyculture of stories where the figure of the mother or the figure of anyone gets to be flawed and complicated and messes up, but also has deep love, those are the stories that are better kind of company than the tyranny of the aspirational self sort of calling out from the page saying, you'll never be this, you'll never be this perfect
But it's so
version.
amazing that every generation just, comes up against this.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we're coming up close to the end of our time.
I want to take you home and talk to you forever.
Do you find joy in writing?
I do. Not always. Certainly there are moments where I feel frustrated by, that essential experience of coming up against the limitations of language, or the trying to say something hard and important and wanting to do justice to it. And those are always the moments where I'm like, I wonder what I could have for a snack. You know what I mean? Where you always want to go somewhere else. But but those moments where I'm, kind of remember a detail that brings things into focus, or I find the metaphor that might get it just right, or often moments of revision where I think, oh, this need or this desire was really kind of driving that moment, and I couldn't quite see it when I first wrote this, but I see it now. You see that other layer. Those are moments of joy for me. They're moments of excitement and moments that do feel weirdly communal, even if it's just me and the page, because I'm feeling part of some great lineage of struggle and attempt.
I just want to quote something that you've said about your process, which I really like, as for how things come into focus when you're writing so slowly, and how revision is so important, multiple drafts. You say, in a way, that's part of how writing nonfiction always works for me, identifying some strange, persistent presence lurking at the edges of my peripheral vision, and illuminating it more fully, draft to draft, forcing it into the light. I think that's what you do so beautifully, and you're so generous with yourself on the page. So really loved wallowing in your writing.
Oh,
it's great.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much.
And I think we have only time for a few questions from the audience, which have been handed to me, and no, I did not make them up. Leslie, you completed Rebecca Godfrey's final book after she passed away in 2022. Could you share what it was like to finish a friend's work?
Yeah. So my friend, the late and great writer and human being Rebecca Godfrey, who was the writer of both fiction and nonfiction. Her second book, Under the Bridge, was this incredible work of literary reportage. Rebecca is Canadian. I'm sure many of you in the room know who she is and already love her. But when she died of cancer, and in the decade before she died, she had been working on a novel about the life of Peggy Guggenheim, who was a figure that I think in a lot of powerful ways Rebecca really identified with. Rebecca taught a course at Columbia that she called anti-heroines, that was like women who were, difficult, ambitious, sometimes women who, they didn't do what they were supposed to, they disobeyed the scripts, sometimes they slept around, but they were brilliant and bold, and Rebecca was an anti-heroine, and Peggy was certainly an anti-heroine in the way that Rebecca wrote her and understood her. She understood her in those terms. So what Rebecca really deeply wanted to finish a full draft of that book before she died, but she didn't. And so her husband and her agent approached me, but she was very clear that she wanted the book to come into the world as like a full and finished thing, not like a book that stopped abruptly. Right. And so I was approached and was asked, would you finish this? And it was simultaneously daunting and also felt like there's not very much we can do for the dead, but this felt like something I could do for Rebecca, to honor this desire that she had been so clear about having. And so the process of working on it was actually, honestly, sometimes people would say it must have been so difficult, I found it to be like a lovely process. Like Rebecca had left a beautiful manuscript behind. Rebecca had left these incredibly exciting notes for the parts of the book she hadn't yet written. I had memories of being in her hospital room and hearing her visions for, the final scenes that would be Peggy's love affair with Samuel Beckett in Paris in 1939. Fast forward to Peggy in Venice 20 years later on her palazzo. Rebecca had such a strong, clear vision that it felt like I was getting to spend time with her again when I worked on it. Right. And I felt like my job was to try to kind of dissolve my own voice and inhabit her voice, her vision, her sense of Peggy as a character, and just try to bring it to life. So it felt like being close to her again. Craft-wise, I realized that I had to kind of bring that self-dissolving, but also Rebecca was a person who lived and wrote with a lot of swagger and verve. And so initially when I started to write, I realized I was being very timid and hesitant because I didn't want to crowd out her voice or be too much myself. And at a certain point I thought, I have to kind of do this with like full force and recklessness and allow myself to kind of take flight, because that's the only way to actually bring Rebecca's spirit and way of being to this project.
Channeling, interesting. And someone in the audience wants to know, are there any updates on 52 Blue, the whale?
That's a great question. As far as I know, I mean, the great question of 52 Blue, the loneliest whale in the world, is whether he would ever find love. I mean, to me, this was the great question of 52 Blue. As far as I know, he has only ever been tracked alone. So in some ways, he hasn't gotten the rom-com ending to his story yet. But I actually, both to be serious, I came to believe like we can't sort of endlessly anthropomorphize animals and project our own human desires, intentions onto them. But yet we inevitably do so anyway. And I had come to believe that actually there was something that still felt satisfying and adventurous and free about, about his solitary life, rather than seeing him as a problem that needed to find a solution.
Right. I have just one thing I want to say about the recovering intoxication and its aftermath. It's amazing. It's the best book on addiction I've ever read. And I just put that out there for anybody who's looking for addiction books.
Well, thank you. I wrote it for people. I mean, I wrote it for everybody, but I wrote it for people who struggled with addiction or people who love people who do. So if you have,
Well, the thing is, you make the recovery period as interesting and dramatic. I mean, most addiction memoirs are, the redemption and relapse, or the same arc. So you avoided those tropes and go into the complexity of recovery, and you also talk about all the writers like John Berryman, Raymond Carver, Jean Rees, who were famous alcoholics. And in fact, I like that line by Jean Rees where she says, after her first lover left, she said, "I'm beginning to see what a useful thing drink is."
That's true.
Anyway, it's a marvelous book full of wonderful nuggets. But do you think, one last question, are we over our romance around art and addiction, do you think?
I mean, I don't know if we'll ever be totally over it, because I think there is a deep, undying desire that has its roots in a reality to think of pain and all forms of suffering as experiences that can be conducive to art, and if not redeemed by art, kind of turned into something beautiful or valuable by art. So I think in that way there will always be some desire to feel like addiction and other experiences of intense psychic suffering can produce something beautiful, and it's not entirely false to believe that they can. I think the romance or the falsehood is that you need to suffer in a certain way, or certainly that you need to destroy yourself in that particular way to produce something beautiful. But I think the connections between darkness and beauty and darkness and making are real, and and thank goodness that there's something to do with pain besides just suffer it, that we make things from it.
Right. Well, I think we're done, and it's been such a pleasure reading you and talking to you, and I appreciate that you're pursuing and embodying complexity, that word and thank you so much for being our guest.
Well, thank you, Marni, and thank you, the jury.